So you've got an incredible story that you want to write. And now it's time to do all the planning and the world building for that story. But where do you start? And maybe more importantly, where do you stop? Well, you clicked the right video because I am going to give you a great place to start your world building process and maybe some insight on when it's time to stop. Now, when you're writing, especially in the realm of sci-fi fantasy, the process of world building can be an incredibly daunting experience. After all, you're creating a literal world out of nothing. And you have to fill that world with all the things that you need to make it an immersive, believable world for your story to take place in. With that kind of scope, it's hard to know where to even begin the world building process. Do you start with the geography? Or maybe you start bigger and you start with the solar system. Wait, maybe that's too big. Maybe you should start with the government. But what about the ecosystem and the wildlife? Oh, but then there's magic, right? Before you know it, you're so stressed out trying to figure out where to start that you don't start at all. So what's the best place for you to start your world building process so you can avoid all the stress and analysis paralysis? From my experience with world building, the best place to start that process is starting with the story that you want to tell. What excites you most about this story? Is it the magic? Is it the kingdom where it takes place? Is it the social structure? Is it the theme? Maybe it's the unique governmental structure or a really cool mythology that you created. Or maybe it's a really interesting in-depth character that you designed. Once you find what excites you the very most about your story, make that the center of your world building and then build out from there. There are two reasons why I believe that this process works so well. The first reason is this. If you start with what excites you most, it will give you the energy and motivation to get started, and then you can carry that motivation to the sections of world building that might not be quite as interesting to you. Maybe you love geography and the story you want to tell has an incredibly interesting geographical landscape that's going to impact the story. But maybe you're not that interested in the politics or government. If you were to try to start your world building process by defining the governmental structure that's present in your story, it's going to be like pulling teeth for you if you don't enjoy it. You're going to run out of steam really quick. And then you won't have any juice left to do all the stuff that you actually enjoy with the world building. Instead, start with the part that you find most interesting. In this case, that's the geography, right? So you plan out the world, you design the map, you place the mountain ranges and the bodies of water and the rivers flowing from those bodies of water. Maybe you decide where the fault lines are and how that affects the different land masses. And then you go through and you place your different villages and civilizations based off of the different natural resources that you created. Before you know it, you've got all this momentum and you've got an excellent start to your story. And with that excellent start, it is then easier to branch into some of the less interesting parts of the world to design. The second reason I like to start with what excites me most about my story is because world building should always enhance the story that you are trying to tell. If your story is a thriller that only takes place in one part of the city, you probably don't need to spend tons of time developing an entire solar system for your world, right? Given the scope of your story, the reader isn't going to interact with other planets that much, so you don't need to spend that much time defining them. And most importantly, your reader's not going to care because they are here to read the thriller. They don't care about the solar system. If your story is about a warrior that's forced to fight in gladiator combat to win back his freedom, you might not need to go super in-depth developing the plant life and its effect on the ecosystem. It's all about managing your own time and your own energy resources so you've got enough background to tell a great story and not too much information that you're trying to shove down your readers' throats. Now, once you find the area that excites you most, then you build out from that point. So let's say you started with the geography. Well, the geography would have an impact on where people choose to settle in the world, right? So then you can move on to developing the civilizations of your world. Different civilizations would have different professions and cultural values depending on their environment and other circumstances. So then maybe you move on to developing the different cultures of various civilizations. Part of culture would include religion and military involvement. So then maybe you move on to planning mythology of your world and what the wars and the military presence looks like for the different civilizations. And with a defined religious system and military structure, it's likely that your civilizations are going to have different allies and different enemies. So then maybe you begin to plot out what the different factions and alliances are. So you start with the area that excites you most, and you let that excitement build momentum to branch into all of the interconnected parts of your world building. And before you know it, you're going to start to see a pretty well-defined world for your story to take place in. For example, the book that I'm currently working on, Melody of Magic, I had a really cool idea for music to be the basis of the magic in the world. And I loved it. So that's where I started with my world building. So music was the center of the magic system, and it was connected to the gods. So I started with the magic and I branched into religion. But there were different sects and factions within the religions based off of the different deities that were being worshipped. So then I moved on to developing different alliances and factions in the different civilizations. And some of those factions were militaristic. So then I moved on to developing the military presence of these different civilizations, which then led to me developing the map and placing the different civilizations at strategic points where they naturally would have settled in the world. And with those different civilizations placed on the map, I realized that I needed to more carefully define some of the geography. So I moved on to the natural land masses and really nailing down my geographical landscape. That led to me developing and naming the different mountain ranges, bodies of water, volcanoes, and some things for storytelling flavor, etc. I had tons and tons of notes, several different drafts of maps and pages full of characters that might show up in this story. So I eventually asked myself the same question that you need to ask yourself. Where do I stop? If I included all of the things that I had taken notes on and went in depth on all of them, soon I'm going to have a 300, 400,000 word manuscript that would never sell. Plus, it would be boring to the readers because it would read like an encyclopedia. So for those of you brave and motivated enough to start the world building process, this becomes the most important question. Where do you stop? You could spend hours, days, months, maybe even years pouring into the world for a story that you want to tell. You could plan from the universe down to the molecular structure of some fictional element that you created. You could, theoretically, spend the rest of your life building a world for a story that never gets written. So where do we stop, friends? You need to find out exactly how much world building you need in order to effectively tell an entertaining story. And then pump the brakes. If you're not going to mention something while you're writing the story, you don't need to spend as much time world building that aspect. You have to choose what parts of the world building are important enough to actually make it into the story. The space on your pages is valuable. You only have so many words to spend up. If you're a debut author in the sci-fi fantasy world, you get about 100,000 words to play with if you're planning on publishing traditionally. And for anyone that's ever written a novel, you know that those 100,000 words, they go pretty quick. You can't spend so many of your words on the world building details that you don't have enough left to tell an engaging story. So how do you choose what details make the cut? It goes back to what I said in the beginning. World building should always enhance the story that you're trying to tell. So you have to decide what details from your world will truly enhance your story. And those are the details that you need to spend time and focus on in depth. I really like the method that author Brandon Sanderson offers in one of his world building lectures online, which you should definitely check out, and I'm going to link it below. Brandon Sanderson separates world building into two main categories. He has physical world building and cultural world building. Physical world building is everything that would exist if sapient beings weren't influencing it. These are things like geography, weather patterns, climate, gravity, physics, solar systems. You get the idea. And then cultural world building is everything that exists because sapient beings have had influence on the world. These are things like cities and civilizations, languages, economy, government, traditions, military, any of that kind of stuff. So Brandon usually picks one item from the physical world building category and 3 or 4 of the items from the cultural world building category. And then he focuses all of his world building time and energy on those 4 or 5 things. His thought process is this: if you do extensive, in-depth planning for those 4 or 5 items, it will be enough to make your world feel immersive and real without wasting time coming up with a bunch of stuff that will never actually show up in the story. And people will be so impressed by how in-depth those 4 or 5 items are that they will just trust and assume that you've done just as much preparation and planning for all the other stuff about the world, and you won't have to actually show it on the page. Remember, it is all about enhancing the story that you want to tell. So you have to use your words wisely. I hope you found this video helpful. Feel free to subscribe to the channel so that you can catch more of the world building and storytelling videos that I put out. Until next time, go create something amazing.